Welcome back in, everybody, to Burrs 365. Joined now by Martin Frank from DelawareOnline.com. Martin Frank, welcome to the show, man. How you doing on this Wednesday morning?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me, as always. I always appreciate coming on here, talking.
I always appreciate you coming on, and Martin getting up early for us, which I doubly appreciate. You had to suffer through that Phillies game last night, so I find it seems like the Phillies are in the Eagle stage, where they're falling apart. Nobody knows why, Martin.
Yeah, it's kind of like we witnessed the Eagles collapse last December and January, and here we are seeing a Phillies collapse. Yeah, they just seem to like spinning their wheel. It's kind of like the Eagles. They keep spinning their wheels, trying to figure out what's going wrong, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. Taiwan Walker comes back and pitches like Taiwan Walker, and that's not good. And the offense gets shut out by a Marlins team that was pretty much left for dead at the trade deadline. It's just bad. I mean, we saw that with the Eagles. They were losing to bad teams too.
Yeah, it is. The correlation is interesting, and obviously that's what the Eagles are going through this year. They've made their adjustments. I still don't know if they know what went on at the end of last season. I still think everybody's wondering, and everybody's got theories, but I do think it was a large scale collapse, and its players, coaches, everything, which is kind of boring because everybody wants to boil it down and blame one thing. But I don't think you can do that. But their reaction was Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio. And we'll start with the offense, Martin, because in full disclosure, we were not there. So I'm just looking at reports as you are. But the one thing I focus on, and I go to our buddy Andrew DeCecco because he was my football guy on the ground. Andrew's very good with just the football stuff. And this is what he wrote about the offense. From what I saw, the offense, it was another ho-hum day for Jalen Hurts in the passing game. That's not necessarily bad. No interceptions, effectiveness. Big explosive plays eluded the offense. That, to me, is the key. Hurts' ball placement was largely on the money as the passing game seemed to exclusively run through wide receivers A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, which I have no problem with that part of it. I'm starting to worry that this team is overcorrecting a little bit with the underneath stuff because they kind of fell in love with the big plays and the explosive plays. Do they need a better walking of the tightrope, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, you want like a balanced offense. I mean, the Eagles definitely have to have that threat of being able to go deep to AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, but you also want to use your other weapons, in the short passing game. And I don't know, maybe it's just a matter of feeling things out. I mean, one of the things I noticed about yesterday's practice from reading other reports was that, Hurts was getting pressured. I mean, the Patriots were blitzing him, and there were a bunch of plays where either he had to throw the ball down or he would have been called for a sack or something like that. So, the offensive line play was kind of a concern as well. I mean, and there's a lot of change going on there without Kelsey, with Cam Jurgens moving back to center, with Mekhi Becton at right guard. It's just a lot of things that they're trying to work through and everything. So, yeah, I think they do need to find that balance of like being able to use those guys deep. And they don't have like a third guy, everybody last year it kills Quez and everything. And I get it because, he wasn't very good, but he did serve a purpose. Teams have to respect his speed deep. And I don't think there's a guy yet beyond AJ and Devontae, of course, who have shown that they can spread the field for AJ and Devontae and Dallas Goedert. And maybe that's part of it too. Paris Campbell's been out for the past week plus. John Ross, for all his speed, I mean, hasn't really shown his ability to get much separation so far. And, Nia Smith hasn't been very good. So, I think they're still looking for that too. I mean, one of the things that worked so well for them was that they had guys who could do like so many different things, and I think they're still kind of looking for that this summer.
Yeah, no doubt. Good stuff there, Martin. I want to talk about the linebacker position with you, Martin. It seems to be getting a lot of discussion among the beat reporters, among us here on Birds 365, people in the chat. Where are you on that position? Who do you think is going to be the starting two guys? Been a little bit of a rotating door there so far through camp. What do you think of that position right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think Devin White is pretty much a lock at one of them. And as far as the other one, we've seen, Zach Bond getting, at least starting out as the first team linebacker. But I think Nakobe Dean.
Yeah, popped up, sea change. Yeah.
So, I mean, Nakobe's been coming on a little bit lately, and Zach Bond didn't play very well against the Ravens. And I think it's still kind of like working its way through. And like Trotter's played pretty well too.
Yeah.
Jeremiah. The only thing with that is, you got to take it a little bit with a grain of salt because, he's coming in, I guess against the Ravens, he came in like second quarter maybe. And, you're going against guys, third stringers, guys who might not make the team and everything. And, he made a play, pretty quickly and stuff, and which is impressive. So you want to see a little bit more from him. This game against the Patriots could be pretty big for him. If he can keep that momentum building, maybe he gets in the discussion, at least being in the rotation at linebacker. But I think when push comes to shove, I think by week one, I think Nakobe might actually be the one who's starting next to Devin White.
All right. Since Xander went down the linebacker route, I've been talking about the linebackers a lot this week. I'm going to give you I'm going to workshop my bold prediction to you, Martin. I want to tell you if I'm crazy or there's a possibility of this. I'm going to say the NFL screwed me with this 17-game schedule. I'd like to say quarter to the season. So I'll say week 6. So after 5 games, the Eagles starting linebackers will be Nakobe Dean and Jeremiah Trotter Jr.
Wow.
Is that crazy, or do you think that's a possibility?
I think it's a possibility in the sense that
not injury related.
Oh, I was going to say
not ineffectiveness from the prove it guys, Devin White and Zach Bond.
I think week 6 is a little bit early. I think there's a chance, like if you're looking like late in the season, and they're kind of struggling like around 500 or something like that, and they need a little push, I could see Trotter working his way in there by then. But I think as the season goes along, his playing time is going to increase. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely a possibility, but something that might be further down the line, I think. But what about like at defensive back? I mean, I think by the time they get back from their bye early October, I think you'll be seeing both Quignon and Cooper DeJean starting.
Oh, I agree with that. I agree with that, Martin. And I don't understand why Vic is wasting his time with Quignon in the slot. We all know he's going to end up outside. We all know that's the end game.
Yeah.
So why wait? Who cares? Cooper got pushed back a little bit. You still have Avonte Maddox. You still have Tyler Hall. And you can argue Avonte's healthy, right? Everybody says, well, if he's healthy. Well, right now he's healthy.
Right.
At least week 1, Avonte Maddox, veteran player, is probably going to be better against Green Bay in the slot than a guy who's never played the position before, other than in Eagles training camp. I don't get this thing from Vic Fangio. I don't get it.
I find it interesting. I mean, I never personally thought that Quignon Mitchell would be a guy they would try in the slot when they drafted him. I don't think anybody did, but like he's played really well there. I mean,
he has.
I would say at this point he might even be better than Avonte Maddox in the slot. And I think the Eagles were kind of like, oh, let's see how the kid does. And they're like, wow, this kid's pretty good. Let's keep giving him some let's keep giving him some play here. But I think the way Vic looks at it is he wants his 5 best guys out there. Doesn't really necessarily matter about positions. And I think Quinion is definitely one of the top 5. And if Cooper DeJean isn't ready for week 1, then maybe Isaiah Rodgers starts on the outside, or they do it like they did. I'm sorry, they do it like they did in Baltimore. Like Quinion starts on the outside and
Yeah.
moves
Well,
in
I do think
passing
they'll do it
downs.
like that. He'll be outside and inside.
Yeah.
When they're, just have 2 cornerbacks on the field, he's going to be on the field. I don't like you're throwing a lot at the kid. I think he's going to be a great player. I think he's handled it very well. But I think when you get to Green Bay and all of a sudden you have this explosive offense with about 1 million different young receivers who can make plays, I think that becomes different. Right now, let's be honest, he's dealing with Britton Covey and John Ross and Johnny, and all of a sudden Green Bay is going to show up and it's going to be a whole different ball game.
Yeah.
I looked at the defensive front as an example. Those poor guys, Bryce Hop, Josh Sweat, they got to go against Lane Johnson and Jordan Mailata every day. All of a sudden, they show up in New England. Bryce Hop is getting sacks. I don't think that's a coincidence. Going back to Mitchell, all right, you're shutting down Johnny Wilson. Now here comes Green Bay. I'm a little concerned about that.
Yeah. I mean, I go back to the point actually you were making. Vic has thrown a lot at him and he has been able to handle it. And I think if it was a situation where it was too much for him, the Eagles would have pulled back and just had him focusing on the outside. So, I mean, I think he's shown that he can do it. Yeah, obviously Green Bay is going to present an issue that, he hasn't seen before, or at least, against good receivers that, he doesn't actually face. But then again, those one-on-one drills against AJ Brown and Devontae Smith when Quinion goes against those guys, I mean, that's like must watch.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah, those are great.
I mean, what better work can a guy get than going against AJ Brown and Devontae Smith? And both of those guys like want to make those catches against Quinion to kind of show him the ropes and everything. It's not like they're going easy on him. I mean, they're really
No, I know. Martin, I have no questions about him at outside corner. I think he's going to be a really good player, and that's kind of my point. He's going to be really good. So let's get him where he's comfortable. Let's get him where he could potentially turn into, one of those young corners. You saw one of them in New England yesterday, Christian Gonzalez, who was great before he got injured last year in this rookie season. And as Vic said, when a couple reporters tried to push Vic on slot corner versus outside corner, he's like different positions.
corner's corner.
Yeah, corner's corner. He said slot is more like a linebacker than anything else. I don't know. I just think he's going to be so good outside.
Yeah.
Why am I waiting? Because Cooper's coming.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you didn't really know that, 100% until, now that he's starting to practice. Yesterday was his first practice. I mean, it's what, 3 weeks, less than 3 weeks? No.
20 days from the first practice. But
no, but I mean until the start of the season.
Oh, yeah. 20, about just over 3 weeks. And I don't think Cooper's going to be a starter week 1. Don't get me wrong. There's going to be a ramp-up period.
And my point is that it's kind of like, just in case Cooper's not ready to be the slot guy week 1, who's our best guy if he's not ready? And right now it's Quinion over Avonte Maddox. I mean, the way I've seen it.
Yeah. Well, Avante's got to play safety now, too. That complicates things because he's taking first-team safety reps because CJ's out. So, yeah, it's complicated. But I'm just I'm in the camp that Quinion's going to be a great outside corner. So start him at outside corner.
Yeah, I think he will start at outside corner. And until Cooper's ready, he's probably going to move inside and passing downs and everything. I totally think week 1, you know, if Green Bay line or if the Eagles line up in their base defense, Quignon's opposite of Darius Slay. Then he moves inside for nickel, and then but once Cooper DeJean is ready, I think Quignon's exclusively on the outside, and DeJean is up at the nickel position.
Martin, you think there could be a trade at that position? I mean, just thinking about that, the numbers in that room. Let's just say Quignon and Cooper are the two guys out there on the outside, and that nickel with Slay on the other side. That puts Isaiah Rodgers and Keely Ringo on the bench. Those are pretty good players to be on the bench. Is it possible? Not saying it's going to happen, but is it possible you think the Eagles go that route and look to trade one of those guys?
I would say unless it's like an offer they can't refuse, probably not, because like we've seen in the past, just like how many injuries are at those positions, especially. I mean, like last year they were pretty much decimated.
Yeah. They're going to hold on to those guys like grim death. They're not trading them.
Like someone's throwing a first-round pick or something, like something crazy. I mean, I think it would take something like that for them to say, all right,
they want to find a way to keep like Eli Ricks and Josh Jobe way down the roster. They like Eli's coverage ability. They like Jobe on special teams. They got a lot of corners, which is a good thing. Because as you mentioned, Martin, what they went through last year, they made an overcorrection. That to me is a good overcorrection.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the offense has been a good overcorrection at this point, but we'll see.
I mean, you look at the guys they threw out there at cornerback last year, and I was actually looking at this when I did my 53-man roster projection. Like, you mentioned Jobe, you mentioned Eli Ricks. I mean, those are guys who made the team last year. The 53.
Mario Goodrich made the team, Martin, and he didn't make it till August 1st.
And he's exactly. Goodrich they already moved on from, and I just don't see a possibility for like Ricks and Jobe to get on the 53-man roster the way it stands. So I mean, that already means that they're better than they were there last year. I mean, Isaiah Rodgers is new, Quignon's new, Cooper DeJean is new. I mean, Avonte Maddox was considered a key player last year, and he
might not make the team. He's a low key, right now is the first team safety. We'll shift it to safety because that to me is the most interesting position, Martin, because two guys are here, CJ and Reed Blankenship, and that's it. It's like Bradbury might be traded. You could see Maddox getting cut. The reason why is because Sidney's coming back. Sidney Brown's going to be back early in the season. We don't know how early, but if they have to place him on injured reserve or keep him on PUP 4 games, and he'll be back. And then they signed Caden Stearns, who's not healthy. So A, they got to find out if he's healthy, but B, they're willing to wait. So that tells me they like him, and Vic likes him. He had him in Denver in 2021. If I tell you they're keeping 4 safeties, who are those 4 safeties, Martin Frank?
Well, I mean, you have to include Sidney, right?
Yeah, Sidney. Well, that's the thing. Is he going to be on the initial 53, or are they going to keep him on the PUP list and say, all right, take it easy, make sure you're completely healthy. He's back game 5. I think they might go that route if they're comfortable with the backups. Are they going to trade Bradbury? Are they going to keep Maddox? Are they going to keep Stearns? That to me is the most uncertain position on this team.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because, I mean, Bradbury has the thing I'd say about Bradbury is I give him all the credit in the world, considering his situation after last year. I mean, he told us like a week or so ago that, he approached Howie and Nick and said, hey, I had a really bad season. What do you think about me moving to safety? They're like, sure. Excuse me. They're like, sure, what the heck? And, I mean, obviously figuring they were going to either cut him or trade him. But, like, he's not only, learned a brand new position, he's actually done pretty well at it. And, I think there's actually a pretty good chance he's on the 53-man roster. as a backup safety. I mean, he's played pretty well. I've seen him break up a few passes here and there. He's at the very least he's made himself tradable. If there's another team like going into, the start of the season that's kind of banged up there, I mean, I could see them throwing the Eagles like a conditional 6th or 7th round pick for Bradbury, in which case it's great. That's what the Eagles wanted and stuff. But, at the same time, like you mentioned, Sydney's probably not going to be ready for the start of the season. Probably going to need like 3 or 4 games. You don't know what you have in Stern, the new guy. So why not, keep Bradbury? At least you have his experience. He's had a really good attitude about the whole situation this summer. I could see them keeping a spot for him.
One of my easiest predictions, Martin, was that the more you allowed Vic Fangio to see James Bradbury, the more he was going to like him. Because he's just such a smart player, high football IQ, good guy.
Good character guy. I mean,
yeah.
You look at him and you look at the Hassan Reddick situation with the Jets. I mean, it's like night and day.
Yeah. And by the way, Hassan's a good guy. He's got a chip on his shoulder, Hassan, because he's been one of the best pass rushers and nobody puts him up there. So I kind of understand why he's got a chip on his shoulder, but I don't think he's going about it the right way. Since you went down that route, Howie's looking pretty good now. He wasn't looking great early on. I think a lot of people were upset when he moved on from Hassan Reddick, but I think that now people understand why. Bryce Huff hasn't shown much. I've argued, though, that Martin, that poor guy's got to go against Lane Johnson every day. And all of a sudden, he gets to go whoever the heck New England's right tackle is. But evidently, and he's showing up and he's popping. Everybody's talking about Bryce Huff. It's funny how that works.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Is Bryce Huff as good as Hassan Reddick? I mean, not yet. Bryce Huff, was playing 42% of the snaps last year. Hassan Reddick was on the field, 75%. But like the Eagles weren't going to have that Hassan Reddick this year. Like the Hassan Reddick they would have had is the one who's unhappy about his contract, who's holding out. I mean, this would have happened if he had stayed with the Eagles. The Eagles weren't going to extend his contract, at least at nearly to the level which Hassan Reddick was hoping for. So, they probably would have made him play the last year on his contract, just like the Jets are, and he would have been unhappy. And you wouldn't have had him, and then you wouldn't have had Bryce Huff because he wouldn't have been here because they, if they thought, Hassan Reddick would stay and everything like that. So, now you're like, even in that case, you're even more screwed up because you don't have Reddick and you don't have Huff. And now Josh Sweat's your best guy, and BG's probably going to have to play a lot. And, Nolan Smith and Jalix Hunt are going to have to be ready to some extent. There are a lot of question marks in that case. So I think they're better off without Hassan Reddick. But I also think that Hassan Reddick of the last 2 years is better than probably what they're going to have with Huff this year.
What have you seen from Huff so far, Martin, when you've been down there at camp?
Not a ton. I mean, he hasn't he hasn't really shown a lot. But like John was saying, you're going against Mailata and you're going against Lane Johnson, two of the best guys, the best tackles on either side, obviously in that top group in the NFL every day. And he's got to learn how to play the run. I mean, he was never, that's why he wasn't playing more than 40% of the time with the Jets. I mean, he was just their designated pass rusher, and he's got to show more of that, with the Eagles, because he's probably going to be playing like 60 to 70% of the snaps. And in that case, you got to be able to stop the run. I mean, not that Hassan Reddick was great at that. I don't think he was, but, better than Huff is at this point. So, yeah, I haven't seen a whole lot. Apparently he had a really good practice yesterday, and that's encouraging. Maybe he'll play a little bit more on Thursday, because I think I mean, obviously Nick likes to rest his starters, but that's pretty much the case on offense. Like Vic wants all those guys on
Yeah,
defense to play.
Vic's different.
So
Vic's running his own show.
yeah,
He's
so
like out on the reservation. Yeah, I'll
the
do it.
only guys who sat against the Ravens were like Darius Slay and Brandon Graham, and both those guys are in their 30s. So I would think that Huff is going to play Thursday night. And yeah, I mean, I'd like to see a little bit more of what he showed yesterday in practice in the game.
Yeah. But he's not going to play much. If he does play, like maybe a series. That way he played Jordan Davis 4 snaps in Baltimore. It's like, what's even the point? But he likes it, and I do find it interesting, and I love it, and I'm sure you love it, Martin. The honesty of Vic Fangio. The backhanded compliments. He's doing a good job. Is Jalek's son? He played better than I thought he would. From what I saw at practice, the backhanded compliments. You think that's going to wear on players though at some point? I love it, but
Yeah.
players aren't used to that in the modern environment. Coaches being honest.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting see how that works out. I mean, we did hear all those reports last year about Miami Dolphins players like, not being too thrilled with Vic. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Jalix Hunt compliment, kind of compliment. He also said, yeah, I think he's also finding that Cornell and Houston Baptist aren't the NFL. I mean, he's brutally honest. I mean, that's what you like to see. I mean, he was saying some good things about Nakobe Dean. Like, so, yeah, he didn't really have a very good practice in that open practice link. I mean, he was honest about that. But I mean,
Bryce Huff, he was honest earlier. He's not ready.
He's getting better, but he's
getting
not ready.
better.
Yeah.
Nakobe, his first one on Nakobe was he's done it in college.
Right.
he emphasized college.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I love it. I personally, as a reporter, love it. I'm sure you love it.
Oh yeah.
But I can see the avenue where guys will get upset, especially if they do something wrong in the regular season and it gets focused on because Vic's being honest about it.
Yeah, I think, but like, I don't think Vic would ever say something like that about Slay or Brandon Graham. I mean, I don't think he'd ever say anything like, BG's, his best days are behind him. I don't think he'd ever say anything like that. I think he's smart enough to know to pick his spots. Like, you can kind of say that about a young player and kind of light a fire underneath them. He could work that way too. And, maybe with Nakobe Dean it has, because, ever since that practice at the link, he's played pretty well. And
oh yeah, I'm going to guarantee week 1, barring injury, of course, always caveat, week 1, Nakobe Dean's a starting linebacker for the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah.
I've already closed that book, Martin. Have you closed it?
Yeah, I'm leaning that way too. I mean, Xander asked that question earlier, and yeah, I definitely think Nakobe will be starting week 1, and I think we're starting to see like a little bit of hints in that direction. So it's interesting. I mean, Vic is obviously, I would think at this point in his career, he's been in the NFL for a couple decades at least. He knows who he can light a fire underneath, and he also probably knows who he should probably not risk angering, because that could be bad for him. So.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there. Martin, last question for me. We're 12 practices deep now in training camp. I'm going to move to the offensive side of the football and the question, what have been your biggest takeaways from the Kellen Moore offense here in Philly? I know you haven't seen much game, but 12 practices in. What have you noticed from the Kellen Moore offense in Philly?
I've noticed that Jalen Hurts seems to be pretty happy in it. And if Jalen Hurts is happy in it, I think that's a good thing for the entire offense. Tons of people have mentioned how he hasn't thrown an interception yet in camp. I think that's huge. Like the stats themselves are kind of irrelevant and stuff, but the fact that like he seems to know exactly where to go with the ball, I think that's a great sign. And I think that's a good sign heading into the season, because, Saquon Barkley adds like a whole new dimension kind of to the Eagles offense. I saw yesterday he had like a
Got a wheel route.
wheel route. I mean, how can they miss with that? With Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts throwing a wheel route. I mean, Barkley is lethal on that. We saw that like in the season finale last year, how he left like Nolan Smith like 20 yards behind him and stuff, and caught a 45-yard pass or something like that. That's there for the Eagles whenever they need it. In addition to AJ Brown, who has 1,400 yards reception, 1,400 receiving yards each of the last 2 years. Devontae Smith over 1,000 yards. As long as they can keep Jalen Hurts upright, I think this Kellen Moore offense is going to be really good for the Eagles. And we haven't really seen that because obviously Nick Sirianni's competitive advantage, which is probably why we're not seeing any of the starters on offense playing. But I think like when the season opens against Green Bay, you're going to see a really good offensive unit with a lot of potential for a great season.
At M Frank NFL. Make sure you follow Martin on x.com. Read him at the Delaware Journal. I always want to say Wilmington. DelawareOnline.com. Make sure you read him there. And don't let the Twitter handle fool you, because he's also occasionally writing about the Phillies. So check out his work there as well. Martin, you're a king among men. I appreciate you getting up early after a late night, helping us out. One of our favorite guests. Applaud Martin Frank as he leaves the show.
All right. Well, thanks for having me as always, and happy to do it.
Thanks,
Martin,
bud.
thanks for being here, man. We'll talk to you soon. All right. There's Martin Frank joining us on Birds 365. Good stuff there from Martin Frank, Eagles beat reporter for DelawareOnline.com. We got no guest in hour number 2. So Johnny Mack will kick around all the topics from training camp. We'll talk about the joint practice. We'll talk about what we just talked about with Martin Frank. And then, John, we have a great super chat that I want to get to from Cameron Richardson. Cameron, thanks for leaving that super chat. I'm going to take a commercial break, and we will lead with that as a topic out of the break. Cameron Richardson's super chat coming up next here on Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.